Yeah, welcome everyone for another Orion Hangout on Zoom. Good to see you all. We have a slightly wider topic today, which includes Orion, and this is full of additional context, so that's great. Thanks to Duo Xu already for being our speaker today. Duo is a finishing PhD student at the University of Texas in Austin, advised by Stella Offner. And he will give us a talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have time for discussion. So Duo, yeah, please go ahead.
Thanks for your nice introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Duo Xu, a finishing PhD student in UT Austin, working with the Offner. So today I will introduce our machine learning approach and its application to identify stellar feedback, especially outflows in nearby molecular clouds. So we know feedback is really common and exists across all physical scales. And in terms of our solar neighborhood, stellar feedback is crucial. It regulates star formation and also possibly compensates the dissipation of turbulence. One typical type of stellar feedback is outflow, which is coordinated structure. And especially their high velocity outflows are triggering some chemical reactions and also creating shocks. But in simulation, we see if there is outflow, that will significantly reduce star formation efficiency and star formation rate. So that will regulate star formation. Also, in energy budget, we see feedback injects significant energy to their host cloud. For example, their injecting energy rate from outflows is almost comparable to the dissipation rate of turbulence. And this is found in several clouds, including Ophiuchus, Taurus, Perseus, and Orion. And in our work, we started with these 4 nearby clouds and to revisit this energy budget with our new machine approach. On the other hand, outflow will affect turbulence. In simulation, we see outflow can steepen the power spectral slope of the velocity. So that might indicate that injecting energy or mass from feedback. However, in some simulation, we see this effect or the impact of outflows last or endure for relatively short time scale. For example, several 0.1 million years. Since outflow injecting their energy on a relatively small scale, they cannot give a great or the larger scale impact on their host, their entire cloud. So turbulence triggered by feedback, especially for outflow, might not last for a longer time because the dissipation will be really fast for turbulence at that scale. But on the local environment, outflow still play an important role regulating the star formation to reduce the gravitational collapse locally. Since outflow is important, but it's really challenging for us to identify them precisely, especially in a star forming region, really active star forming region. We can see outflows almost everywhere. And usually observers will just give a cutoff on the velocity, such as just cut off the residual velocity and only maintain the blue shifted or red shifted blob and treated that as outflows. Then there are several issues with that. First, there are mass that are injected perpendicular to our line of sight. So that are located near the rest frame velocity. So that cannot be identified in that method. On the other hand, there might be contamination in high velocity channels because high velocity blobs are not only coming from feedback, they might be caused by turbulence. So 2 effects may give us unprecise estimation of their velocity or mass or energy. So that's why we introduce our machine learning approach to accurately quantify feedback in 3-dimensional. And also machine learning is really fast. There is no cost actually for human to identify them by eye. So, and also machine learning approach is consistent performance across different platforms, non-like human, because human may have bias towards different structure, especially identifying this collimated structure. So here, I will give a really brief introduction of our machine learning approach. Our machine learning approach is called Cascade 3D, and it has 2 parts. The basic idea is we have the input data cube, the spectral data cube, position velocity, and then we have the encoder part, which will break the data cube into smaller pieces. So that's the feature vector, and then we reconstruct based on these features to translate this feature into a new data cube with exactly the same shape. So that may tell us the position of feedback. So this is similar to the segmentation to highlight where feedback is. To train the model, we started with hydrogram simulation, which model a launching outflow in a piece of molecular cloud. Then we conduct a transfer to generate 12 cell and 13 cell emission. Since in simulation, we can track exact position of feedback. So this is a tracer field. This is our target. We want to identify this structure caused by young stars. Then with the input data and the target, we will train this kind of 3D. After training, we test our model, not only on synthetic data, we also test it on real data. This is a real cloud emission in Perseus. The blue is 12 cell emission, and red is our prediction where outflow is. And then we extend our method to the full map prediction. Since different clouds have different physical conditions, so we want to enhance the diversity of our training set. We conduct simulation with different turbulence, different magnetic fields, and stretching their snapshot at different evolution stage. Also, when we conduct synthetic observation, we adopt different CO abundances, different cloud temperature to enhance this diversity. To train the model, we have 2 tasks. The first one is ME1 model. So this is really straightforward, just identify the position of feedback. So this is what a human will do. This is a pixel level mask on the position of feedback. This is yes or no prediction. Moreover, we go a step further. We predict the fraction of mass associated with feedback in each voxel. So that indicates, because there might be contamination in each voxel emission, because there are emissions not only coming from feedback, there are also emissions coming from ambient gas or other foreground or background emission. So this will help us to exclude that contamination and only tell us what is the fraction of mass in each voxel. After training, I will show a performance on an isolated outflow in Perseus first. This is the position velocity diagram. The 2 panel is the same region, and we can see our model is able to highlight this coherent high velocity feature. And also here, red is the outflow, which has a collimated structure, both blue shifted lobe and red shifted lobe. How about its performance on Orion data? Since Orion is really different to Perseus, it's more active star forming region and also has a higher kinetic temperature. Here is our 2 model prediction. If we zoom in onto a smaller region where there is a previously identified outflow in 12 cell emission, here is the prediction by our model. The white contour is our prediction. The background is 12 cell emission. we can see we are not only highlighting this high velocity structure, there are also some emission near the rest frame velocity or the central velocity, also contain some outflow material. So that might be missing in previous estimation. And the symbols are the position of younger stage YSOs or older. Younger is class 2, class 1 or class 0. Older is usually class 2 or class 3 YSOs. For reference, we also give the contour, bullshit contour, redshift contour, give an arbitrary cut at 8 kilometers per second and 13 kilometers per second. So that's roughly consistent with what human identification, but more extended because we also contain some emission in rest frame velocity. Here, I just want to give you some prediction, give you an insight on why it performs roughly identifying everything to be feedback. Because in this region, we see there are multiple coherent high velocity blobs, especially highlighted in red. And blue is the tropospheric emission. So we are able to identify all the structures as well. We can extend it to rest frame velocity. To be continued, then we have a pixel level mask on the positional feedback. Then we can conduct power spectral analysis on the entire region as well as on feedback region. Here we take Taurus as an example. If we conduct the power spectral on the integrated intensity of 12 CO in Taurus, we can see a single power law with a slope around -3. If we apply our power spectral analysis onto the feedback region, which predicted by our model, we see there is a breaking power law here. And this breaking scale is roughly ½ parsecond. So this is roughly consistent with the typical size or width of outflows. Here, the bottom one, we highlight the scale bar as well as the prediction by our model where outflow is in blue shift low and red shift low. We are not only identifying this breaking power law in Taurus, we also identify them in Orion as well as in Ophiuchus. Orion and Ophiuchus, there are stars and also cluster of stars. So they are breaking power law. The scale is relatively small, and their young YSO separation is almost identical. So that might explain why these two are similar. And Taurus, their stars are more widely distributed, it's sparse. So their breaking scale is larger. The only exception is Perseus. One explanation might be there are multiple star clusters. So there are smaller scale, but also since the clusters are separated away from each other, so that might have a larger impact on the host cloud. So that's why their feedback scale is larger than the other 3 clouds. We have a pixel prediction on the mass, and then we want to give you a hint on how it performs in estimating mass, especially to exclude the contamination. In simulation, we know exact the mass coming from feedback. So then we conduct a similar approach as observers do, combine 12 CO and 13 CO and use our model to identify outflows, and then compare that mass to the real mass in simulation. MF is able to retrieve their true mass within a set of 2 uncertainty, while the traditional approach by observers that includes contamination from foreground or background will overestimating the mass by a factor of 5 or more, similar as the line of sight momentum. we have a pixel level prediction and have an accurate mass estimation on outflows. Then we want to conduct a systematic survey to study the correlation between feedback mass and the number of YSOs in the region. We first apply a box or a window to scan through the entire region and then counting the YSOs inside it, as well as calculating the mass of outflows inside this box. Then we found this correlation. Here, the YSO is not limited to only young stage, as well as older influences, including class 2 or class 3. There is a kind of linear relation between the number of YSOs and the feedback mass, and slope is 1, so that indicating each YSO associated with one solar mass material that comes from outflow. How about other 3 regions? Almost similar. So different clouds have different physical environment, but in terms of the correlation between YSOs and feedback mass, they are performing similar. Here we list the final results predicted by our model, the number of YSOs and the number of feedback mass in each cloud, as well as the total cloud mass. So on average, 10% of the cloud mass are associated with feedback for all these 4 clouds. And each YSO seems to be associated with 1 solar mass. And this is consistent across all different clouds. Usually, we might think outflow is more associated with younger YSO. However, we didn't see that trend because there are several reasons for that. First, the separation between young YSO and older YSO is not that distinct. There might be older YSOs being classified as younger class YSOs because they're older, since it's all photometric classification. On the other hand, outflow radic might exist for longer time scale than the typical time scale of young YSOs. So that's why YSO material or outflow material is more correlated with the entire number of YSOs, not only the younger YSOs. Similarly, we see a correlation, a linear relation between the line of sight momentum of feedback and the number of YSOs. And really interesting, we found their velocity, the outflow velocity, line of sight mass weighted velocity is about 1 kilometer per second. While in previous studies, in most cases, outflow velocity, line of sight, mass weighted one is around 2 or 3 or 4. So that's much smaller than previous estimation. Why? Since previous estimation just discard the rest frame velocity, gas emission. So that we are overestimating the velocity because we're only considering the high velocity blob and use that velocity as the mass weighted velocity on our side. And also, the gas located near rest frame velocity channel will dominate the mass. Here is the 12CO prediction. If we overlay that on the 13CO emission, we see there are still mass really near the central velocity, and also that mass dominates the calculation of feedback mass because 13CO is 60 more massive. I mean, the abundances is 60 less than 12CO. So if that is 13CO, so that means the mass calculated from that region will be much higher than that only comes from 12CO. So that's why our estimation of the mass weighted velocity is around 1 kilometer per second, much smaller than the previous estimation. Then let's move on to energy budget. We compare with our newly results with the previous studies. All these studies are coming from the reference here. And in each reference, they also compare with the energy injection rates coming from feedback, especially outflows, to the turbulent dissipation rate in that cloud. And in previous studies, this is holds for all clouds. So our new estimation is much larger than previous estimation. So that conclusion still holds. And the difference here, especially a factor of 10 difference, might caused by several reasons. For example, for Orion, in the prediction or in the identification in Jesse Fetter's paper in 2020, they just exclude Orion OMC1 because it's dramatic, noisy region, and they are not identifying outflows in that region. However, our model also identifying outflows in OMC1, so that's why there is a boost up on the total energy. And also for Ophiuchus, their study only limited to ROF B2 region, and our study extends to the entire L1668 region in Ophiuchus. So different field of view or different survey might result in this discrepancy between the total outflow energy over the turbulent energy. So I will stop here, and the takeaway message is, from our systematic survey, we find usually outflow gas is 10% of the host cloud gas mass, and also on average, each YSO is associated with 1 solar mass across all different clouds. And we found a broken power law. So that might indicate the energy injection rate or the typical scale of outflows. And this scale is correlated with the separation of YSOs. And I will stop here and take any questions. Thanks.